Good morning. Thank you all for coming to this training. I guess we can all say this is a very important training. We're really glad to see this type of turnout for this. So thank you guys. Before I get started, my name is Dennis Nyland. I'm the mental health ombudsman for the state with the governor's office. Also today we'll have Karen Wood, who's the EAP program manager for the state, and we have Carl Roston, who's the suicide prevention officer for the state. Before we get started, we're going to show you a video. The video is from the Governor Steve Bullock and Lieutenant Governor Mike Cooney. They just have some messages to tell you guys before we get started. After that, Carl Roston will come up here. He has a presentation on suicide in Montana. They'll give you some information on suicide as far as the national statistics and for the state of Montana. They also give you signs and symptoms of suicide. And also, he will give you some information and some ideas what to do if you know someone is suicidal and what to do. After that, Karen Wood will come up here. She'll talk to you about the EAP program, give a presentation on that. If you guys are all familiar with the EAP program with the state, it used to be part of your benefit program, your benefits. As of January 1st this year, it's actually a standalone program, and she'll go over that program with you guys and explain that to you guys. And after that, we'll actually have a question and answer session, if you guys have any questions. Of course, if you guys have questions as we're going through, just raise your hand or whatever, and we'll get our attention. We can definitely answer questions as we go, but we left a space at the end for you guys to give any questions or answers you have. So let me real quickly give you just some information here, and you guys just tell me what you guys think about this. So think about this for a moment. What if we told someone that they had a flu or a cancer or an illness? It's like you're not even trying. Or if you just changed your frame of mind, you'd feel better. Or I get you have cancer and all, but you have to at least make an effort. Is that something that we should be doing, that we feel like we should be doing? No. But that's what this is about. We're talking on the screen, if I had it up here. Anyway, on your brochures, you see it's Confront the Stigma. That's just some examples. When people have stigma about something, they don't know what to do, they don't know anything about the information about it. What do? Either they ignore it, or they make, they say statements that probably don't make sense, because they just don't understand it. So that's what we're here today, to help you guys hopefully have a better understanding about suicide, the effects of suicide, and what we can do with those signs and symptoms, and what we can do to help someone that might be possibly suicidal. So the Mental Health Ombudsman's Office, I don't know if you guys know this, but in the United States, 1 in 5 Americans are affected by mental illness. And in the state of Montana, 1 in 5 families are affected by mental illness. So you look in this room like this, you can just kind of figure out the numbers. There's probably numerous people in here that are affected by mental illness. And there's nothing wrong with that. My office, the Mental Health Ombudsman's Office, I'm there to talk to consumers or individuals that have mental illnesses, their family members, loved ones, friends, to help them find resources, to help them find groups, organizations that will help them. And then if they're having issues or complaints about the services, then I'm there also to help them with that information and help them hopefully resolve that issue. So that's what my job is with the Mental Health Ombudsman's Office. Before we get started here, you guys have everybody got a brochure? If not, you can raise your hand. We got some in the back. Okay, real quickly, I'm going to go over this. This is obviously for you to keep. First page there, Governor Bullock, just basically an opening remarks on this campaign on suicide. Next one is the warning signs. Then the next page, on page 3, it's prevention, and talked about what you do as far as prevention for suicide. Page 4 is a self-rating depression scale. With that, and Carl will talk about this more with his presentation. You guys can actually take this, you can look at it, and it's pretty self-explanatory. Carl can talk about that more. Next few pages is Karen, Carl and my information. So even after our presentation, after the question and answer, if you guys have any questions that comes up later, you can call any one of us to be able to get that information from us. That's what we're here for. And then on the last page is some contact numbers, resources. The one at the top is the Montana Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and there's other resources also on there. And at the end of Carl's presentation, he'll also give you some information on some other resources that are out there that are new to Montana, and he'll talk about that. Let me go ahead and show you the video here.
Hello, everyone. First of all, we'd like to thank you for being at the training today. What you learn and talk about today could end up saving the life of a family member, friend, coworker, or even a stranger.
As longtime state employees, Steve and I both know the demands of work, community, and family. We are so proud of the work you are all doing day in and day out across the state. And we know it's not always easy, which is why we want to talk to you about one of the most important issues facing the health of our communities today.
Depression and suicide. Those two words can make many people anxious and uncomfortable. But we all know someone who struggled with one or both. In Montana, we pride ourselves on taking care of business without complaining, which, when it comes to mental health, causes too many of our fellow Montanans to suffer in silence.
When it comes to taking care of our physical health, it's easy to talk to a friend about wanting to go to the gym or eating right. But what about talking about managing stress or dealing with depression?
Which is why we're asking you today to confront the stigma. Open the conversation with someone who's struggling. If you're struggling, give yourself the chance to get help, the same way you'd go to the doctor if you hurt an arm or a leg.
Today's presentation will give you tools and information to be able to recognize warning signs and learn what you can say and do to help.
You'll also hear today about EAP, the Employee Assistance Program. It can help you or your loved ones navigate tough issues through confidential counseling. You'll also hear about a lot of other great resources in our state, including Montana's Mental Health Ombudsman in our office, and emergency contacts if you or a loved one are in crisis. The bottom line is whether it's hard times at home or work, you do not have to struggle in silence. Mike and I both pledge to confront the stigma whenever we get the chance. We hope you will too, because honestly, you could end up saving someone's life. Thank you again for coming today.
Again, thank you guys very much for your time invested and your willingness to be at this training today. We appreciate it. And Carl.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you all for coming. My name is Carl Roston. I'm the Suicide Prevention Coordinator for the state of Montana. And what we're going to be talking about today will be we're going to start off by putting a little bit of a face to this issue, because a lot of people don't understand just how big of an issue this is, not just in Montana, but actually nationally. Then we'll go over some warning signs, some demographics of things to look for, and most importantly, we're going to talk about what you can do if you know somebody or have a loved one who's at risk of suicide. There are things that you can do to stop it or help prevent it. Okay? So let's start with putting the issue in perspective. First of all, understand this is clearly not just a Montana issue. The issue of suicide is getting worse in the United States. We've had a 28% increase in the rate of suicide nationally over the last 15 years. 2014, which is the most recent national numbers that we had 42,000 suicides in the U.S. That's now the 10th leading cause of death in the U.S., and it's going up by about 1,500 to 2,000 every single year. We have about 117 a day, about one every 12 minutes. The number I want you to kind of take a look at and kind of put in your memory as a baseline is the 13.4. That is the national rate of suicide. The reason I'm asking you to remember that number is because when we start to talk about Montana, where our sample size is a lot smaller, we have fewer people, numbers don't always tell you the story, but rate does. Okay? We also know that women attempt suicide much more frequently than men, about 3 to 1. However, men die by suicide at a much higher rate, about 4 or 5 to 1. Can you think of why? The method, okay? Definitely by means. By far the most common means of attempt is overdose. However, about 70 to 90% of all suicide attempts are by overdose. However, it is the least lethal. Only about 2 to 11% of overdoses result in death. Whereas if you use a firearm, 93%, okay, it results in death. Yes, ma'am?
Is accidental overdose part of those statistics?
No, no. Part of when I get, we have what's called a suicide mortality review team here in Montana. We're the only state in the country that has it, and we review every single suicide that occurs in the state. But that we work very closely with coroners, and we get the coroner's reports and that type of stuff. So when a coroner arrives at a scene when they've had a death, they have to establish intent, and we're going to talk about intent later on. Something like a firearm, it's pretty easy. There's pretty much clear that based on forensics, it's easy. But things like car accidents and overdose, there has to be more of an intent established that that person intended to do this on purpose to die. So we only review the ones that we're only talking about the ones where it's been clearly established that it wasn't an accidental overdose, that there was intent. So nationally, 50% of all suicides are by firearm. Okay, so half with all other means making up the other 50%. When we talk about children, and this is an area that's growing, unfortunately, right? So in the U.S., 5 to 14-year-olds, 428 in 2014. But what's alarming is take a look at the number from the year before and the year before that. We're seeing younger and younger kids kill themselves. Now, before anybody asks, no, we have not had a 5-year-old. These are CDC age brackets. So the Center for Disease Control has brackets, age brackets, where they categorize kids. 5 to 14 is the youngest age bracket. The youngest in the U.S. last year, we had 3 9-year-olds. Okay, in Montana, we've had 2 11-year-olds. That's been our youngest going back to 2003 when we started keeping electronic records. We did have a very, very serious attempt about 2 months ago of an 8-year-old, but did not die, thankfully. Okay, so 11 is our youngest in our state. Among young people, 15 to 24, it's the second leading cause of death in the U.S. We have this is also one of the fastest growing populations for suicide. We've had more than a 200% increase in the last 40 to 50 years. We're now losing more than 5,000 young people each year. This includes college kids, which is the second leading cause of death for a college kid in the United States is suicide. We have about 1,100 suicides on U.S. campuses each year, more than 24,000 attempts. Montana's been no different. The most recent one we had was about 2 months ago at Montana Tech. We lost a 19-year-old. About 2 months before that, we had a 19-year-old at U of M. And prior to that, we had a Montana State football player and a number of people at Montana State. Montana State had a horrible time last year. The very first semester at Montana State, so August to December, they had 22 attempts on campus. Okay, and that's in one semester. This is a big piece of it, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. I mentioned that we have the review team. So one of the things I started to notice is that just about every coroner's report that I read, or any type, the death certificate, that type of thing, there was some type of interpersonal conflict that occurred many times within minutes of the suicide. Okay, so we know that interpersonal conflicts often play a pivotal role in suicide, because understand that suicide is very much a relational issue. One of the things that we've had we've been able to do with looking at all the suicides, we're now getting a large enough sample size where I'm having epidemiologists actually look at it and be able to tell us whether it's statistically significant. Well, we just got done reviewing 555 suicides from January 1st of 2014 to March 1st of 2016 in Montana. Okay, and it's amazing. We are now establishing that being married, despite what your personal experience may be, is a protective factor against suicide. We see the highest rates of people that are single, widowed, divorced. All right? Being married is actually a protective factor. But it's very much a relational issue. And especially when I talked about even with young kids, we had 4 suicides of kids this year that occurred within 5 minutes of a phone call. A breakup or some type of conflict on a phone call, and within 5 minutes, they'd shot themselves. So relationships are a critical component. Yes?
Are you also tracking stuff like cyber bullying?
We
those kind of
identify,
social media?
yes, we identify cases, if it's identified in the coroner's report that was a factor. The important thing about cyberbullying or bullying in general, remember that cyberbullying is very seldom have I seen it as being the factor. There's usually a lot of stuff that went on way before this. It was just the last straw. Okay? All right, so our vets. We lose our rate of suicide for vets, 18 to 29 in the U.S., is 56 per 100,000. Remember our baseline of 13. We're losing about a vet every 65 minutes in the U.S. Okay? About 22 a day. Their rate overall, they constitute about 20% of all suicides. The vet rate for the entire nation, for all age vets, is about 22. In Montana, it's 65.7. We're losing approximately 56 to 57 vets a year to suicide in our state. The elderly, about 7,700 over the age of 65 each year. This becomes much more of an issue with elderly men. About 85% of all elderly suicides are by men. They're about 7 times the risk, especially elderly white men over the age of 85. They have a rate of about 54. A very important piece that we are emphasizing right now from what we're learning is the role that primary care plays. Nationally, 45% of all the people who die by suicide gave warning signs. Okay? 45% of all the people who died by suicide saw their doctor within a month of completing the suicide, 20% within about 24 hours. The important piece that I want you to understand about suicide, though, is the majority of the people who die by suicide give warning signs. Okay? So, for instance, when I looked at the 555 suicides, 411 of them gave at least 3 warning signs. 3 warning signs right off the list we're going to go over in a few minutes here. And we missed them, including our primary care. And that is an important piece, is that even we have to raise awareness about this. That's one of the reasons why we're here, is to raise awareness so people know what to look for, what to recognize. It's even more prominent in the elderly. 73% of the elderly suicides saw their doctor. Okay, primary care is going to play a much larger role in this issue than just about anybody else, because they're the ones that are the most prominent. A major issue with the elderly that often comes up is the issue of chronic pain. That is a big issue with pretty much middle-aged to the elderly, is the issue of chronic pain, that we have a large portion, 20 to 30% nationally. About 35% of the people who died by suicide in Montana had issues of chronic health, chronic pain. Okay? They're about 2 to 3 times greater risk of suicide. Now Montana specifically. We currently have the highest rate of suicide in the nation. This is not new. We've been in the top 5 for the last 40 years. And if you go back to 1918, when the Office of Vital Statistics was created, we've been a top-tier state for suicide for nearly 100 years. 2014, officially, we had 251 suicides for a rate of 24, almost double the national rate. 2015, I told you we had 555 suicides, so now our rate's 28.5. Okay? So, when we talk about this, why? Why Montana? Well, it's not just Montana. States in red are the top 10 in suicide. States in yellow are the lowest. I'll tell you that states like Vermont, New Hampshire, West Virginia, a little bit of outliers. They're not usually on the list. They had bad years. But this is every single year. Another important piece to understand, it's not one factor. There are multiple factors in play when we talk about this issue, and we have a perfect storm in Montana. So what do you think some of those issues may be?
Vitamin D.
Vitamin D. What do we get? What do we get from sunshine? Vitamin D. Vitamin D deficiencies are correlated with increased risk of depression. Where we are on the longitudinal line, you cannot get enough vitamin D naturally to give your body the amount of vitamin D it needs. Ask your primary care or your doctor. Majority of the people in Montana have vitamin D deficiencies. So yes, vitamin D is a factor. What else?
Economic status.
Economic. That's what's interesting about that is we're gonna see if that changes at all here pretty soon. We know that Montana we had about a year ago, we had about 150,000 people that had no access to health care. Well, the Securities and Insurance just released a report just last week that shows that now that we've cut that in half. We're now down around 70,000 people that have access to insurance, which is going to be interesting. But the piece that still is out there, 19% of our kids live 100 to 200% below the federal poverty line. So yes, economics for sure. What else? Access to firearms. We live in a gun culture. If you grew up in Montana, you grew up around guns. All right? And this is not an issue of any type of gun control or anything like that. This is an issue of access, access to lethal means. Bottom line is, if all you have access to is a pile of pills, you're going to die 2% of the time. If you have access to a gun, 93%. What's interesting about Montana, do you realize that 88% of all firearm-related deaths in Montana are suicides? 88%. That means 12% are homicides and accidental shootings. Okay, they're not being used properly. And so we're really emphasizing safe storage, and because this is mainly for our kids. One of the 11-year-olds shot himself. I get the coroner's reports. I see the 12, 13-year-olds who are shooting themselves. Okay? So, access to lethal means. What else? Now that kind of goes with the whole vitamin D piece. That kind of ties on to that.
Access to medical facilities?
Not just access to medical, but mental health. We have a huge shortage of mental health services. We don't have psychiatrists. I mean, if you take a look, if you split our state at Billings and go this part of the state, how many psychiatrists are east of Billings? Zippo. In Montana, about 80% of the people that are on psychotropic medications have never spoken to a psychiatrist as general practitioners. Okay, and they've turned into jacks of all trade. And I mean, I used to teach at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. I know how much training they get. They go on a 6-week psych rotation. 6 weeks out of 8 years of medical school. So a lot of them are put in positions of having to become mental health people without really being properly trained. So access to mental health is a huge issue. What else? Which one? Alcohol. Alcohol. All right, so a lot of people don't realize, do you realize Montana is #1 in the nation in alcohol consumption per capita? Woohoo! We're #2 in alcohol-related death. We're #1 in DUIs. We're in the top 5 for binge drinking and underage drinking. The correlation, 42% of the people who die by suicide had alcohol in their system at the time of their death. It's about 20-25% nationally. 42%. Okay? And that's right off the toxicology reports that I get from the state crime lab. Can you think of anything else? Any other factor?
Winter.
That kind of goes with the whole vitamin D piece.
The number of reservations?
Our reservation, our American Indian population definitely has the highest rate. They have a rate of around 28 compared to about 22 for Caucasians. But you have to be careful there because this is a perfect example when I talked about rate compared to population, because out of the 555 suicides that occurred, 42 were American Indians. So someone might say, well, that's not very high. Well, you have to remember, American Indians only constitute 6% of our population. So although the number seems low, the rate is very, very high, especially among Native American young males. Their rate's up around 46. Okay? And it's even, what's interesting is the rate for American Indians is triple what the national rate is for American Indians. So it's also a Montana issue. Okay? So does anybody have any thought about the fact that we're sitting on the Continental Divide? Altitude. There have been a number of studies. The most recent one actually just came out about a month ago, that there's a strong correlation between altitude and suicide. Metabolic stress caused by long-term oxygen deprivation. So one of the things that the most recent research actually took a look at DNA and neurotransmitters. One of the things that we're now realizing is that when we get to a higher altitude, our brains produce less serotonin. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that is often associated with mood. If any of you have ever seen it, think of Prozac or Paxil or Celexa or Lexapro, those are all called SSRIs, specific serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They increase the production of serotonin or the release of serotonin in the brain. So that we know that serotonin is key. So as we live at a higher altitude, our brain naturally starts to produce less serotonin. And on the opposite side, it increases more dopamine. Well, dopamine is often associated with high-risk behavior, more impulsive behavior. So you have lower mood regulation and higher risk behavior. Not a good combination when it comes to the risk of suicide. But what we know and of course these studies are worldwide. This isn't Montana or even the United States. At about 2,500 feet, they see a spike in suicides. The average suicide in Montana last year occurred at about 3,500 feet. Right? So altitude. But now here's the biggest issue, and it's the topic or the name of the presentation today: stigma. Stigma is huge, because we have a huge stigma when it comes to mental health issues. We see depression as a weakness, and here's the words that I see, and it kind of goes to that cowboy mentality we have in the Rocky Mountain region, is that if I'm depressed, I'm a burden. I'm holding my family back. I'm holding people back. I don't want to be a burden. Everybody would be better off if I wasn't around. That is what I hear all the time. I get the text messages, I get the suicide notes. That is, if I could stricken that word out of the dictionary, I would love to do that, the word burden. Okay? And if you think you're a burden, how likely are you to ask for help? You're not. On the East Coast, it's cool to have a therapist. Everybody has a therapist. Seriously, in the state of New York, 1 in 5 people see a mental health professional. The stigma's not there. You have an issue, you talk about it. Go talk to your counselor about it. Talk to your therapist. We don't have that here. You throw all those other factors that I just talked about, and then you throw in that, and you start to understand why we have a culture of suicide in our state, in our region. And that's going to take a cultural shift in thinking. It's not going to be, there's no overnight fix here. This is going to take some time. For kids, so here's an example. Over those we had 2 years where about 65% of the kids used firearms. 39% nationally. So we had, yes, sir.
For kids under, I don't know, 20 or,
Yes.
what's the factor ratio for single parent families?
Here's the great question, because there's a lot of times that people worry about single parent or both parents working, that type of stuff. There isn't a strong one. The biggest factor, the largest factor associated with adolescent suicidal thoughts is called parental disconnect. That has nothing to do with whether the parents are divorced or the parents are both working, that type of stuff. It has to do with whether the child feels validated by their parents, feels accepted by their parents, feels like they can communicate to parents. 86% of the children who die by suicide, the parents didn't even know their kid was depressed. 86%. And part of that is, there's the piece that we have the parent who just doesn't know what's going on in their kid's life. But then there's also the piece of it that is kind of a natural piece where, as parents, it's hard to picture our child as wanting to die. So we lose our objectivity. It's kind of like why they always say a doctor should never treat his own family, because you can't be objective. You become biased. And as parents, it's really hard for any of us to think of our child being so sad that they want to die. And so we miss the signs. So part of that's kind of natural, just being in that role. Okay? Any other questions about that? Okay. All right, here's the big piece. The role of mental health. 90% of the people who die by suicide have a diagnosable mental health issue. Okay? Most prominent, depression. 49 to 64%. Now this is national. Let me give you Montana numbers because I just got done looking at this. And of course, this is only based on about 313 coroner reports where they actually identified or looked at mental health. I can't get coroners to always give me all the information. But of the ones where mental health issues were identified, 83% had a diagnosable mental health issue, 69% depression of the ones that in Montana. So this isn't far off from national. We see the depression is even a little bit higher. Right? Second most common, substance abuse. Substance abuse starts off as a form, for many people, as a form of self-medicating. Many times to deal with this issue. You drink to forget. You drink to numb. You don't want to deal with it, so you just drink. Well, the problem is you're using a depressant to deal with your depression. Doesn't work too well. Does not work too well. Here's the good news, though. Depression is now seen as one of the most treatable of all psychiatric disorders. There's as high as an 86% treatment success rate, but here's the catch. It's more than just throwing somebody on a pill. We have a tendency, we live in a culture, and pharmaceutical companies push their medications big time, that don't take this, it'll make everything better. Yes, it can be part of the solution, right? Definitely. But it's not the answer. It's a combination with counseling that's shown to be the most effective. And what the counseling is, and I'll talk about this a little later, it's nothing more than coping skills and resiliency skills. That's all it is. You can put whatever fancy therapeutic name you want to put to it. It's nothing more than coping skills and teaching people how to be resilient. And what's scary to me is I'm seeing younger and younger kids that have no ability to cope, no ability to deal with adversity. And they are at higher risk. We know that we can treat depression if people ask. And that's one of the reasons why we included the self-rating scale. That's a pretty simple little scale in there. It just gives you an idea of, ask some questions that kind of gives you an indication of maybe you have some depression there that maybe you didn't realize. Or it kind of makes sense after you take the test type of thing. So that's just something for your own awareness. So warning signs. So these are the things that we want to look for. These are the things that I find in people who die by suicide. As I mentioned, 74% of the suicides in Montana gave at least 3 of these signs. Okay? So we use a mnemonic called Is Path Warm. The first one is I is for ideation. They start to talk about dying. They start talking about death. There's a morbidity to their thoughts. Okay? They have a sudden interest in firearms that wasn't there before. We had so many people, we had at least 3 or 4 people in the last year who never owned a gun in their life, went and bought a gun, and were dead within an hour of purchasing the weapon. We had 3 women in the last 2 years who went to a gun dealer, bought a gun, went home, didn't know how to use it, went back to the gun dealer who showed them how to use it, went home and shot themselves. That is an awareness piece. Okay? They start to write about it. We've had numerous people. We had an incident down at Western Montana College in Dillon where we had a 21-year-old who suicided on campus. Within a month, 3 freshmen turned in English composition papers for grades that were suicide letters. What more of a warning sign could you give? Okay? So they start to write about it. It starts to become a thought, a pattern of their thought. It's how they're expressing it. It becomes on their mind. S, substance abuse. A change in their pattern of use, usually more. They start to drink more and more. So instead of having the glass of wine at the end of the day to wind down, it turns into a bottle. Or it becomes drinking to the point of intoxication every night instead of maybe one night. You see a change in their pattern of use. The P is purposelessness. No reason for living. Two behaviors that we often see. They start to give away prized possessions. Jewelry, music, clothes, art, money, whatever is of value to them. I saw it, the 11-year-old wrote a detailed suicide note giving away all his video games to his siblings. Gave what little money he had for mowing lawns to his dad. Or I see it all the way up into the elderly where there's a sense of urgency to settle their estates or revise their wills. They start to give things away. Another one that we often see, change in hygiene. A deterioration in hygiene. They stop taking care of themselves. There's no purpose. Why? Why should I take care of myself? So the deterioration of personal hygiene. And I'll tell you, just about any time that you see a change in hygiene, remember, we're talking about a change, so if the person's always been a slob, that's not what we're talking about here. Okay? A deterioration in personal hygiene. Just about any time you see that, you're dealing with an underlying mental health issue. Just about every time. Anxiety, lots of agitation, difficulty concentrating, difficulty completing tasks, missing work assignments, that type of stuff, acting out of character, and also we start to see sleep. We're starting to see sleep difficulties. Some of the national studies have indicated that up to about 30% of the people who die by suicide started to have issues with sleep within 3 months of the suicide. And we often think of someone who's severely depressed as they sleep all the time. Many times it's just the opposite, especially with younger adults and adolescents. They have more of an agitated sleep. Difficulty falling asleep, they have trouble staying asleep, they wake up early in the morning, and they're tired. They want to sleep, they just can't. Okay? T is for trapped. You could say tunnel vision. Throw in that too. Understand that the person who is suicidal often feels alone. Even in a crowd or in a large family, they feel alone. They feel that nobody cares. They feel they'd be better off without them. They're holding their family back. There's an incredible amount of mental anguish and pain that goes with being depressed. And for a lot of people, it's like an emotional migraine. It's all consuming. They can't see outside of it. They just want the pain to end. And that leads into the hopelessness. No future orientation, no goals. Okay? The W, the withdrawal. They start to pull away. They pull away from family, they pull away from friends, they drop off out of their favorite activities. An avid hunter no longer cares about hunting. They drop off the basketball team, they quit work, they drop out of school. We had 3 cases in Montana in the last 2 years of a college student who suicided, who was living in the dorm at the time of the suicide, but was not currently enrolled in school. They were enrolled the previous semester, but never even bothered to enroll in the current semester, but we're still in the dorm. Okay? Anger, you will see a lot of anger and irritability, a lot of rage, a sense of revenge often to some of their statements. That kind of goes back to the piece I just mentioned, that they often feel alone and isolated and that no one cares for them. So the relationships they do have are critical. So what we would consider a typical high school breakup is catastrophic to this kid. But it's also catastrophic to the 45-year-old guy whose wife just left him. Because they think this is the only person that ever cared about me, and now I'm alone. You just validated all the horrible things that I think about myself. So there's often a sense of revenge. And I see it in the writings. I see a lot of times the suicide notes. That there's a statement in there, a sense of, the 11-year-old that I talked about. Okay, yeah, he gave away his video games, he gave away his money, and the last sentence of this kid's life that he ever wrote was ripping mom a new one because mom was involved with a custody battle with dad and was really causing a lot of pain for the family. So the last thing this kid ever wrote before he shot himself was ripping mom a new one for ruining the family. Okay? Recklessness. Change in behavior as far as how careful they are. It can look like lots of different things. Maxing out a credit card, unprotected sex, illicit drug use, multiple sexual partners, gambling. The one that we're starting to notice, a change in driving habits. We had a number of people who reported that they noticed a change in driving habits within about a couple months of the suicide. Mostly with younger people, young adults. Careless driving, road rage. Right? They stopped they weren't being careful. Of interest, and we're kind of looking at this one, we noticed a few that talked about a history of head injuries. TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, or concussions. We had at least 3 or 4 that had a history of 2 or 3 concussions from rugby, ice hockey, football, that type of stuff. And what was interesting about all of them, they were all cleared to return to activities. They cleared the medical protocol, but within 6 months started to have psychological after effects. And the one that was noted the most was a change in driving habits and road rage. So it's something else that we're starting to take a look at. And the mood change. The crying, depressed mood, acting out of character. Okay? If you notice these, you have to be able to use the word suicide. You have to be able to bring it up. Okay? It is one of those last taboo words that we have to get past. There is a myth out there that people are afraid that if I bring it up, I can put the idea in the person's head. There's not 1 ounce of research to support that. Not one. On the contrary, asking somebody if they're suicidal validates their pain. And think about it. When we're having a bad day, sometimes just being validated and know that we're understood helps us get through it. But it also, as a way of offering hope, it lowers impulsivity. It gives the person an opportunity to talk. You can do no harm by asking somebody if they're suicidal. Okay? And that leads me also into this. This is an important concept when we talk about suicide. Ambivalence. And what I mean by ambivalence, what did the person think would happen? Okay? Very seldom do I ever see a person who's 100% sold on killing themselves. Most people talk about that there's a part of them that wants to die, a part of them that wants to live. We have fight or flight. It goes against our nature to destroy ourselves. This is one of the reasons why overdose doesn't work. Because what do you get with an overdose? Time. Time to change your mind. Before this position, I was the Director of Social Services at Chaudière. And I had an 18-year-old girl who ingested 180 Tylenol while I was at Chaudière. She went to Walmart, bought the pills, drove herself into a field, sucked them down. She would have easily been dead within an hour. Complete liver and kidney shutdown. Well, guess what happened after about 10 minutes? She started having bad abdominal pain, and she panicked. She panicked, and she called her mom. Now, we had to airlift her to the University of Utah to stabilize her kidney and her liver, but she survived. Okay? You get that chance. Can any of you think of what national landmark is best known for suicide? Golden Gate Bridge. So since 1937, there's been more than 2,000 suicides off the Golden Gate Bridge. They're averaging 1 every 11 days. San Francisco Police Department talks down an average of 3 to 4 people a day. Okay? Of those, of the 2,000, only 30 people have actually survived the fall. It's a 250-foot drop. You hit the water at about 80 miles an hour. Temperature of the water is about 40, 41 degrees. Not a lot of people survive that. Well, they did a documentary a couple of years ago where they interviewed, as part of the whole thing about the Golden Gate Bridge, and they interviewed the survivors. Every single one of them wanted to die until they stepped off the bridge. Changed their mind in the 4 to 5 seconds it took them to hit the ground or hit the water. Here's the interesting piece. None of those people have died by suicide since. None. One of the things that you'll see at the end, 90% of the people who attempt suicide and live will not go on to die by suicide unless they use a gun. Okay, there's an incredible amount of ambivalence. I also want you to remember the very first warning sign, ideation. Understand that the part of a person who talks about wanting to kill themselves is the part that wants to live. It is a cry for help. Okay? So, if a person, you ask the person, they say yes, maybe, sometimes, you always want to ask them if they have a plan. Because having a suicidal ideation by itself is not that uncommon. Majority of the people that do it, they immediately discount it. They think about the reasons why what they have to live for, whatever. Okay? For a few people, it festers. It sticks. It grows, and it grows into a plan. Those are the folks that I want us to be able to recognize. So, how specific is the plan? The more specific, the more detailed the plan, the higher the risk. Have they written the suicide note? Have they stockpiled the pills? Have they loaded and unloaded the firearm? Those are all detailed, those are all issues that indicate imminent risk of suicide. Lethality, what's the proposed method? And here's two big Montana issues. The availability. What is an 11-year-old doing with unsupervised access to a handgun? And by the way, that's another piece that's important to understand. We're not talking about hunting rifles and shotguns. 89% of the firearm-related suicides in Montana are handguns. Okay? So what is an 11-year-old doing with unsupervised access to a handgun? And then here's another big issue, especially in rural Montana, how close is help? So I'm on the faculty of the Law Enforcement Academy. I train all the officers in mental health and suicide. Working with Beaverhead County Sheriff's Department. A lot of people don't realize that Beaverhead County is one of the largest counties in the United States. It's the size of Delaware and Rhode Island put together. It only has 9,500 people in the entire county. So Sheriff's Department sitting in Dillon, they get a 911 call from Monida or Lima. It's an hour and a half response time. That's pretty common in many rural parts of Montana, northeastern Montana, central Montana. So proximity to help is a big issue. Here's another big piece that we've talked about a little bit. Intent. Okay, this is a critical component. What did the person think would happen as a result of their behavior? What was the intent behind the behavior? The reason why I want to emphasize this to all of you is because many times we take a look at a behavior and we determine risk based on the behavior. And because of that, many times we miss it. Let me give you an example. So when I was at Chaudère, I had two girls that were admitted to our acute unit the same night. One of them had taken 40 Coricidin, one of them had taken 5 Advil. Which one's suicidal? The girl that took the Coricidin was trying to get stoned. Coricidin taken in high doses causes hallucinogenic effects. She had no intention of dying. This was a regular weekend routine for her. She was trying to get stoned. Now, don't get me wrong, she needed help, but it was more on the chemical dependency side. The girl that took the 5 Advil read the bottle. It said take 1 to 2 tablets. She thought 5 would do it. She took the pills. About 15 minutes later, fight or flight kicked in. She started to panic. She told her parents. Her parents laughed at her. Told her she was being a drama queen, was doing it for attention. By the way, that's pretty common. I hear that. That's the parental disconnect right there. Okay? Luckily, she told a school counselor the next day who took it serious. What would have happened if the school counselor had blown it off? Guarantee you the next one would have been a heck of a lot more than 5 Advil. Do not just look at the behavior. Take a look at the intent behind the behavior. Okay? We've talked about this. At least 70 to 80% of the people who die by suicide gave warning signs. Right? People usually give warning signs. We have to get better at recognizing them. And timing, the more recent the attempt, the higher the risk or the behavior. Okay? All right, so talking with a person who's suicidal, if you see the warning signs, we have some do's and don'ts. You do want to ask the question, are you having thoughts of killing yourself? Are you suicidal? You do want to ask them if they have a plan. And here's a critical piece. You cannot, there is no confidentiality. You cannot keep it to yourself. All right? Even primary care. If you went into your doctor's office and said that you were suicidal, there is no HIPAA when it comes to suicide. Because it's critical that people receive treatment and that other people are made aware of it. Family members, spouses. It's critical, so there can be no secrets when it comes to suicide. What we don't want to do, you never want to leave the person alone. Okay? You don't want to sworn to secrecy. Here's another place that what we often do because of our own discomfort with the subject matter. We make an assumption, oh, they're just venting. Oh, it'll pass. They're just having a bad day. Oh, everyone feels bad once in a while. And we have a tendency to dismiss those. People often do not make direct statements. They often make kind of indirect statements, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But people often aren't very direct, and then we often dismiss it thinking it's just a bad day. What we know from the research is that once somebody makes a comment, you have an attempt within 6 days. We cannot ignore it anymore. Okay? You do not challenge or dare argue. Okay? We see a lot of that. A lot of times that's our own discomfort piece. As far as asking the question, so some just real basic guidelines. You always want to do it in a private setting. You want to give the person an opportunity, give them time to express what they're talking about. In your handouts, you have resources that are available to you. So have some resources. Probably the biggest piece that I want you to remember, though, is this piece right here, the persistent piece. Because understand that one of the things that happens with somebody, especially in our region with the stigma, is there's often a huge amount of shame and guilt associated with feeling suicidal. And there's a huge fear of being judged. Okay? And a lot of times people will act out through behavior or a situation or make an indirect comment. They're not able to say it directly because they're afraid of being judged. Okay? So you may ask somebody, you may see the warning signs, and you may ask somebody, are you suicidal? Are you having thoughts of killing yourself? And their immediate response may be no. Do not let it be the only time you ask the question. If you saw enough of the warning signs to ask it once, ask it twice. It's the second time that the person's going to have a better sense that you're someone who cares, that you're not going to judge them. So asking the question, the direct approach is the best approach. And usually, a lot of times I'll note what my observations were. And I notice that, you haven't been hanging out with your friends. It doesn't look like you're taking care of yourself. You look sad. I know you've been drinking a lot. I'm worried about you. Are you suicidal, or are you having thoughts of killing yourself? You can do no harm by asking that way. It validates their pain. It gives them an opportunity to talk. Okay? How not to do it. Don't do any of these, please. You're not suicidal, are you? Please say no, please say no, please say no. Or here's the one that I actually hear in vets. Because out of the law enforcement academy, a lot of vets kind of make a transition into law enforcement. And when I bring this up about, you wouldn't do anything stupid, would you? I have yet to do a class at the academy where one of the officers says, that's exactly what our squadron leader said. That they'll show a video about suicide prevention at the National Guard, and then the squadron leader comes, okay, now you're going to be doing something stupid like that. Now let's get out there and get some work done. Do you think anybody's going to be honest? Do you think anybody's going to be open when it's worded that way? If you word something like this, I guarantee you the answer is going to be no, and it's going to be no matter how many times you ask the question. The minute the person feels judged, they're shutting down. The offering hope piece, you're listening. You're not challenging them. A lot of times, and it's with the best intentions, I know, but we often say to somebody, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. Oh, don't feel that way. Don't do that. Please. Okay? Or another thing that we often say is, I know how you feel, I understand. No, you don't. Understand that suicide is and depression is a very individual experience. Every single person in this room could be suicidal right now, and it's a unique individual experience for every single one of you. And I don't care how long I've been doing this, I don't know your thoughts. So instead of saying that, the best thing for you to say is, I have no idea what you're going through. Will you help me understand? That opens up a whole different category. Okay? And then say, I don't want you to do this. I don't want you to hurt yourself. I don't want you to kill yourself. Let's go talk to somebody. I'll go with you. You don't have to do it alone. Let's go talk to somebody. No, I'm not going to leave you alone. No, I'm not going to keep it a secret. This is too important. It's persistent. It's persuade. You're connecting. You're going with them. You're telling them, no, I don't want this to happen, and we're going to take you to help. Okay? And the getting help piece, this looks different based on where you live, because it depends on the resources that are in your community. The best response is to take them directly to the ER or a medical clinic. So I say that because if you're in central Montana, you may not have the option of an ER. There may be a clinic, you may be a mental health, you may be a school counselor. If all else fails, call 911. That's the one thing we do have. I train the officers. All officers are trained on how to do a welfare check. They know how to do a suicide assessment. They know the questions to ask. They know the routine. Every officer that goes through the academy is trained. Okay? So if all else fails, call 911. It's important though because that's where your job ends. I don't want any of you to feel like you are responsible for saving anybody. Okay? You're not here to diagnose. I'm not trying to turn everybody into a little junior therapist here. Okay? You are simply recognizing the signs, knowing where to hand off somebody who's in trouble. Okay? Finally, some other resources that are available. Along with 911, we have the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Now that is the national lifeline, but if you call it from Montana, it goes to either Great Falls or Bozeman. So we have regional call centers, trained people 24/7. They're all part of the emergency response system, so they can access resources in every corner of the state. Another one that we have that we just started a few months ago is we now have the National Crisis Text Line, because we found that especially with kids, but we're also finding a lot of vets. They feel really uncomfortable talking on the phone, but they will text. They will text. So they text MT to 741-741 within 3 minutes. That's been when we've tested it a number of times and we've had other people test it. On average, it's about 3 minutes it takes for a counselor to jump back in and respond. And they have access to the emergency response system as well. So they can access 911, they can access any type of mental health that's in the community. It's something that's there. These are two good resources. I would also encourage you maybe to visit our website, because I have a ton of material on there. If you've had a family member who's made an attempt, I have brochures and information on. If you've lost someone to suicide, I have a grief manual that you can download, because suicide grief is completely different than any other type of grief. It's a complicated grief. And so that's a resource. There's a great video for parents. It's called the Youth Suicide Video. It's out of the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. Fantastic. 4-minute video that information that every parent should know. And I have a ton of other resources. If you work for the state in a position that you have to answer phones or talk to people on the phone a lot, well, if you've ever had to deal with a suicidal caller, that's not a lot of fun either. So I have a protocol on how to deal with a suicidal caller on there. Lots of other stuff. Okay? The final piece now, and this is where I want Karen to come up, is that we have also added and beefed up a number of resources for state employees around our EAP program. And I'm going to have Karen come up and tell you about those programs. And we'll take questions after Karen's presentation. Yes, sir. Literally hundreds. Usually the ones I do in communities is, there's one called QPR, which is a little more in depth. It's about a 2-hour training. I do that around the state. So, yes?
Do you give better trainings to schools so students?
Yes.
know?
We train, House Bill 583 passed last legislative session that requires OPI to have suicide prevention training for schools. Unfortunately, only recommends that the schools use them, but we have QPR, I can't mention that again, that we provide to any school that wants it. We also have evidence-based programs that teaches the kids skills. We have a great program for first and second graders called the Good Behavior Game that teaches first and second graders coping skills and resiliency skills that has been shown in the research to have an effect 30 years later. So we have a lot of programs for schools.
Do you have that same program built for middle schools? 'Cause
Middle schools, the Good Behavior Game really started off with first and second grade, and now they've gone into middle schools also. And what's interesting, and Karen's going to talk about this, through our EAP program now, there's actually a resiliency program for adults. And so I'll let Karen tell you about that.
So one of the reasons that State Human Resources wanted to sponsor this type of training is because we aren't exempt from this issue among our state employees and our families. We have had employees that have taken their lives. We have had employees that have had family members and loved ones take their lives. And often when you're in that type of situation, there's years of grief and coping and stress. And one of the things that's really important for you to know is that as human beings, we can come to work and try to leave our personal lives at home, and we can go home and try to leave our work lives at work. But the reality is that doesn't happen too well for most all of us. We are one person, and that deals with a lot of things in life, and life happens. And since this training, without fail, we have had folks come to each one of us and talk about their experiences and their loss of loved ones and mental health in their homes and depression and anxiety. We've had employees that have reached out to us and said, in fact, I know of 2 specifically that actually had a plan to take their life. And after hearing the training, they've reached out for help for themselves. I've had employees contact me that had loved ones they were concerned about. They have gone home and said for the very first time, do you have a plan? Are you suicidal? I'm concerned. I had a gentleman say that his wife was depressed for years and years and years, and he never asked her those questions. And he went home and had a conversation with her, and together they made an appointment, and she's on the road to getting some help and some treatment. We often suffer silently in the workplace. I've had employees multiple times tell me they don't want anyone to know. They don't want their boss to think they can't do their job. They don't want their coworkers to think that they're crazy. They tell me that their kids have come to them and said things, and they're scared. They don't know what to do for them. So they've said some of those things. I've had a parent come to me about a child that was depressed, and she was crying, and she said, I've said don't do something stupid. I have said you're being a drama queen and I can't take this anymore. So as you've heard this training today, one of the things that we wanted to leave you with is hope. That we don't know what to do until we're educated about what to do. And we have resources to help you. Without fail, there hasn't been a week that has gone by since we have implemented the EAP that I don't have an employee in my office talking about how depression and anxiety or suicide has impacted them. So we are very fortunate that the state has invested in an employee assistance program at a time when benefits are being reduced. So I'm very glad to take just a few minutes today to talk to you about what's available so that you know what you can do if you find yourself in these circumstances. So the Employee Assistance Program used to be a part of our healthcare benefit plan. It was very limited. Maybe some of you were familiar. You had the 4 free counseling visits. That was part of the health plan. A little bit of critical incident if something came up in your workplaces. But one of the things that we knew is that it wasn't enough, and that employees were suffering, and they had lots of issues that were impacting them in the workplace. So I just want to briefly go over what that is, what benefits you have, just to give you a quick awareness of the comprehensive benefit that's available. You and anyone in your household have access to these benefits. So what that means is if you're on the health plan or not on the health plan, you have access. If you live with a girlfriend, a boyfriend, some child, a niece, a nephew, a neighbor, anyone in your household has these benefits. So that's important to know. We've limited it in the past to be health plan members. So a lot of people have felt good that there's now a benefit available for those that even aren't on their health plan. So there's a 24-hour crisis helpline. And so I really want to emphasize, if you're thinking about maybe yourself or a loved one, or you're concerned about a coworker and you don't know how to have a conversation with them, you're concerned they're suicidal, there are counselors available 24 hours a day with our EAP that can help answer those questions. This number at the bottom of the form here that you all got as you came in is for state of Montana employees only. There's 24-hour access. During the day when you call, you would probably get an EAP consultant who can connect you with a counselor if that's what you need, or any of the other services available. After hours, a counselor will answer the phone. So it is a crisis hotline as well. This benefit is a comprehensive benefit now, which means you get 4 counseling visits per issue. So that means maybe you're experiencing some grief and you can get 4 free counseling visits for that particular issue. And then a couple months later, maybe you have some personal issues with gambling or chemical dependency, or your marriage is falling apart. Those are separate issues, so you can get 4 free visits per issue. I've had many people communicating to me that the issues that they deal with themselves and others becomes really overwhelming. And so sometimes when we need help, what's the first thing that we think of? We are exhausted. We don't want to reach out for help. We're tired. I hear things like, I don't have anything left to give. I don't know what to do. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I've tried this before and it hasn't worked. So partner with somebody, reach out, help them. Call the EAP. I see people every day who just need a little help getting connected to resources. It's the position in state HR is to support you and help you. So reach out. This brochure, as Dennis said, has a lot of contact information. There's many avenues you can take to get help. So make sure that you find somebody to help you through that, and I'm certainly willing to meet with you and help you. There's online counseling, which is a really nice new feature. A lot of people don't want to make a connection yet. They're kind of concerned. They might not have ever done counseling before. So the EAP has sponsored an email through eAccess where you can start emailing with the counselor if that's more comfortable for you. So take advantage of that. Carl talked about resilience training. One of the things that the EAP has a part of our benefit package is to give resilience training. It's a 6-month individualized training and coaching with a clinical manager to help you build coping skills, to manage stress, to deal with both professional and personal things through a 6-month period. We've had many people through the process, and we did a pilot program with corrections, and a lot of the correctional officers weren't really excited about it in the beginning. They said things like, I really don't want to do another one of your trainings. I don't have time. If this is another deal with difficult people, you know, they just really didn't want anything to do with it. After they went through this, we heard things like, oh my gosh, I go home and I'm not a jerk anymore. I've, realized how much time I've missed from work because I absolutely hate coming in. The day before shift, I'm sick. And we've experienced that. How many of you get that Sunday feeling where coming to work is the last thing you want to do? Or going home. I've had people say, work is my getaway. I don't want to go home to that drama-filled craziness that's home. So these are ways to help you in both instances to get the help that you need. I won't spend a lot of time today, but there's life balance resources available. You have financial, adult services, child care services, legal, mediation, all kinds of services available through the EAP. It's not just counseling. There's a lot of things that contribute to stress and depression. I've talked to people who have parents, very sick parents living with them, and there's resources available to help you. I've talked to people who have special needs children and need daycare services. There's people who have financial issues. They're on the verge of bankruptcy. There's financial support available through the EAP. So really check this out. There's lots of support available for all of you to be able to deal with those things that come your way. And it's a slow fade. We chip away and we try to be strong through all these things. And sometimes one day you wake up and you have nothing left. And then depression really sets in, and then those suicidal thoughts could maybe be a part of what you're dealing with. We're here to help. There's resources available. We want to leave you with hope that there is something you can do, and that we want to take care of our employees and make sure that they have what they need as they come in every day and serve the public in whatever capacity that you have. So take advantage of it. I think you will be pleased. Dennis and Carl are going to come back up. We always get lots of questions in the group and individual setting, so we're here to answer that and help you in any way that we can. Any questions?
Is the EAP program available to state of Montana retirees?
It is not. It is not. I have had retirees call me. There's a lot of services available to retirees that they're not aware of, mental health support as far as community through Medicare, through Medicaid, through other options, so I connect with them on that.
I talked to Kim Pullman at the Healthcare and Benefits Program asking whether this training would apply for our Next Steps discounts on our insurance, and she said she thinks it will. So if you want to get credit as part of your Next Steps insurance savings, contact Kim Pullman at our Healthcare and Benefits.
Yes,
Glad to
we
hear
are.
that. That's
yes,
awesome.
we
Yeah,
are
so
hoping
maybe
to-
next time you sponsor a training like this, you may want to check with Healthcare and Benefits, see if it qualify for Next Steps.
Very good. Thank you.
Do you offer resiliency training for children of state employees?
You know, we just sent a message off to our EAP vendor to ask if they have any criteria for people who, there is an expense involved with the resilience training that's 6 months long. So we're working out some of those details to see if it can expand into dependents and what the cost would be and that type of thing. I will tell you, we are developing a group session as an introductory to what resilience and coping is. It's going to be a 2-hour class that we're going to offer, and the first one's going to be in September in the Sanders Auditorium. You'll be seeing some education on that. We will be promoting that as kind of a springboard to this training to introduce the concept of resilience and coping in the workplace.
One thing I'll tell you is that the good behavior game that I mentioned earlier, last month New Mexico implemented it statewide, and I had a legislator approach me last week about the possibility of looking at it from Montana, because actually the cost is almost half of what it would cost in New Mexico because we have fewer students. So there's a possibility that we may see some legislation to have it in all of our schools.
And I'm having more and more agencies budget for this particular individualized training, at least a handful of classes for their people. So if you're interested in that, do reach out. We'll give you some information on it so that you can take it back to your leadership and have those discussions.
What is the cost line?
The cost right now is $795 per person for a 6-month period. We have a few of the group sessions that we're going to get for free from the EAP, and I'm negotiating right now to try to get that price down for next year. So.
And aren't there some departments that actually will cover it?
Yes,
been
that we
some.
have, depending on departments' budgets, we do have whole groups going through it as part of the training investment in their employees.
Are any of those trainings required by the school district? Number one question, and
Okay.
if they are or are not, you know, to try and alleviate the stigma of just even talking about this, what's an age of children you should be talking about this kind of subject
Okay,
and how it
great
shouldn't be
question.
something that they shouldn't be able to ask their friends about?
So as I mentioned, that it was required, House Bill 583 required OPI to have it. Unfortunately, the legislation wasn't ready to say that it was required for schools to use it. It's recommended.
That's
We've
what
had
I
a
thought I
ton.
heard you say.
As far as the age group, now, for instance, the Good Behavior Game is not a suicide prevention program. It is a resiliency program. It just happens to benefit lots of different things: bullying, mental health, also, school attendance, all sorts of stuff. As far as suicide specific, we usually look at 6th or 7th grade. That's the time to start to have it. We have programs that are developmentally geared toward the 6th and 7th grader.
However, I'm gonna jump in here about younger children. I've had a lot of people reach out to me about 6, 7, 8-year-olds that show sign of depression, divorce, that type of thing. The EAP has counselors who will meet with children to discuss depression or early signs of dealing with a huge transition. You can go with a child for that. So I don't think it's ever too early to pay attention to those
Yeah, I
signs.
think if there's signs, certainly you can
Absolutely.
open up the conversation. I just didn't know, just kind of on an average, on general, just to open up the conversation and create the awareness to try and get the stigma, because that's where it's gonna, that's the group that's gonna change this.
So for
to
instance,
talk about it.
here's a program that we're doing. We're working with pediatricians around the state where we're giving out gun locks that have tags on them about the warning signs, and pediatricians will just hand them out during wellness visits. And it opens up, and the biggest benefit that the pediatricians have noticed, it opens up a discussion
Yeah,
about
what's
mental
that
health
for?
issues in the
Yeah.
family.
Great, thanks.
Yes,
Are your slides gonna be available?
I can, yeah, absolutely.
We are actually recording, and we are going to have this training available online, his slides available online, this brochure available online. So we'll update the websites and have that information for everybody.
They'll probably even be updated because I'm getting new information in from the review. And so I was telling Dennis I'm gonna even update with more recent statistics and stuff like that, so.
So what website is that? Is it the EAP?
It will be on all of our websites, actually. Dennis has the Mental Health Ombudsman's office has a website. Carl has his website, and we'll have an EAP website through State Human Resources. And so it'll just take a little time to get that up and running.
However, if you wanted the slides,
Yeah, this is my first suicide training, so you went through those pretty quick.
okay,
so
I'm happy if you
that'd be great.
shoot me an email,
Okay.
and I'm happy to send you the slides.
And Carl's email is in this little brochure for you to reference. Any other questions today? One final thing, oh, go ahead.
This seems like such a huge problem and so diverse over so much of our society. If you had all the money in the world,
Lovely. I had a legislator ask me this question.
okay? Well, no, I mean, that's what needs to happen. The legislature needs to ask that question.
Mhm.
What would you do? Well, if you were to prioritize 5 things,
Okay, first thing I would do is have the Good Behavior Game in all 1st and 2nd grade. Okay, that'd be one through statewide. I would have mandatory screening for depression by all primary care, because it's now, and that's a national recommendation for kids 12 and older, so that it's the next vital sign, basically. Training for all primary care and suicide prevention and screening. We talked about early intervention, home visits, home health care visits for kids. That's a big one. Let's see, is that 3 or 4?
well, are those things, and you can make it happen, are those things that you can or would put in the executive planning process?
We already are. matter of fact, I had to redo the state suicide prevention plan for the upcoming legislature, including our final report from the mortality review team, and we have our recommendations in there. And they are all, everything that I'm talking about to you is in that report,
Very good.
but that's as far as I can go. I can't make it happen. All I can do is say, this is our recommendations.
So talk to your legislature.
Talk to your legislator if you want to. You didn't hear that from me.
Just recorded.
Yeah. Yes, I'm paraphrasing. I'm paraphrasing what he's saying. That's all I'm doing. Any other questions?
So is there any way to do a presentation like this to the legislators?
I've offered many times. I will be testifying August 26th to the Children and Families Interim Committee on our plan. And so a lot of the stuff will come up at that point.
Just a side note too, yeah, this is off, so if you guys didn't sign in, just make sure you sign in. It's important just so we know that people are going to this training, that they appreciate the training, because we want to build offices.
And if a question comes up afterwards, please feel free to contact any one of us. Okay? And we'll stick around for a little while after too. So, thank you guys very much for coming.
Thank you.